Actor and director Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle have died in a, quote, tragic event.
Tom Cruise turned 63 on July 3rd, 2025, and Hollywood found itself confronting a strange contradiction. Here was a man in his 60s who still behaved like a blockbuster in motion. He was still sprinting across rooftops, dangling from helicopters, and performing stunts that insurance agencies begged studios to prohibit. His films had earned more than $13 billion worldwide, making him one of the most profitable actors the medium had ever produced. And when the British Film Institute honored him with its Fellowship Award earlier that year, critics and historians finally admitted something that audiences had sensed for decades. Cruise was not simply a movie star, he was a force of cinema. But while Cruise seemed unstoppable, Hollywood itself felt unsteady. The industry was wrestling with new technologies, new distribution models, and new anxieties. Theatrical releases lived or died on opening weekend volatility. Franchises dominated studio slates, and nostalgia became both a business strategy and a psychological crutch. In that climate, the past felt more stable than the future, and audiences began revisiting films that had been built before the era of algorithmic filmmaking. Then December arrived, bringing a headline that froze the industry. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were found dead in their Los Angeles home.
To Rob Reiner that tragically he and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner have been stabbed to death in their home.
Their son Nick was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The news traveled quickly, but comprehension moved slowly. Reiner was not simply another filmmaker. His work was woven into the cultural DNA of multiple generations. His films were not rare art house objects. They were part of everyday language. The Princess Bride, Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men were watched, quoted, referenced, parodied, and celebrated long after their release dates. His death triggered an inventory of memory. People began examining the pieces of their lives that his films had quietly occupied. This kind of retrospective attention produces unexpected effects. Old interviews are resurfaced. Directors and actors are recontextualized. Films are watched again, not for entertainment, but for understanding. Audiences become archaeologists, and the industry becomes sentimental in a way it rarely allows itself to be. It was during that period that a particular collaboration returned to the foreground. Reiner's direction of A Few Good Men and his work with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. The film had always been respected, but now it gained a second wind. Clips went viral. Monologues were dissected. Younger viewers encountered Nicholson's courtroom explosion for the first time and reacted with the kind of astonishment older audiences had forgotten they once felt.
Back to you. I know what I said. I don't have to have it read back to me like I'm... Why the 2 orders? Colonel?
Suddenly, it made perfect sense why crew members had crowded into the rafters during filming just to watch the scene play out. The film became a time capsule from a moment when performance, not spectacle, was the anchor of mainstream cinema. But alongside the nostalgia came distortion. Rumors rarely miss an opportunity to attach themselves to revived attention, and this moment was no exception. A headline circulated online. Tom Cruise finally tells the truth about Rob Reiner's intervention. It was vague enough to invite curiosity and specific enough to imply scandal. Other variations appeared. Phrases like breaks his silence and reveals long-standing secret and Hollywood rumors confirmed. These headlines traveled quickly because they promised a story audiences recognized. The troubled star and the older mentor, the intervention, the rescue, the hidden crisis. It was familiar narrative territory, easy to imagine, easy to package, and easy to monetize. But the rumor had a problem. There was no crisis to point to. Cruise did not describe an intervention in the psychological or personal sense. He did not recount a confrontation. He did not reveal a breakdown. Instead, he offered something far more mundane and far more revealing. He credited Reiner with creating a set where actors could do serious work without needing to arm themselves defensively. He praised Nicholson for delivering his performance in full during off-camera angles, so Cruise's reactions could be authentic. He remembered the rafters full of crew members not as gossip material, but as proof that sometimes a film becomes theater before it becomes cinema. So why did audiences choose the rumor over the reality? Perhaps because the reality demanded attention to craft, and the rumor demanded nothing more than speculation. Rumors operate in the space of imagination. Craft operates in the space of discipline. One spreads faster than the other. There is also a psychological element at play. Modern audiences have been trained to expect dysfunction from creative environments. We imagine directors as tyrants and actors as fragile. We assume chaos must accompany artistic output. We assume someone must break for a film to succeed. But Reiner's career contradicted that assumption. His sets were not notorious for cruelty or volatility. They were known for the opposite. Kevin Bacon once said that A Few Good Men was one of the most enjoyable filming experiences of his life. Demi Moore described working with the Reiners as intertwined with family, not merely with film. These descriptions do not support scandal, they support cohesion. And cohesion is rarely considered dramatic enough to attract attention. Meanwhile, the rumor gained traction precisely because it implied that cohesion was a facade. The word intervention suggested that Reiner stepped into Cruise's life to correct something out of view. It allowed audiences to imagine that the actor they saw on screen was rescued off screen. It reinforced a romantic paradox, the idea that the strong must be saved and the successful must be stabilized by unseen forces. It was a fantasy of vulnerability imposed on someone who seemed invulnerable. But when Cruise finally addressed his collaboration with Reiner in detail, he described something that sounded far less like crisis and far more like a masterclass. He talked about precision, about rhythm, about the energy of a room that transforms into an audience even before the cameras roll. He did not describe being saved, he described being challenged. The distinction matters because challenge is not intervention. Challenge is the work. Challenge is what actors seek when they want to grow. And Cruise was at a moment in his career when growth mattered. He was transitioning from heartthrob to actor, from icon to craftsman. A Few Good Men was not merely a film for him, it was a test. Could he withstand Nicholson's pressure? Could he hold the frame? Could he modulate between restraint and explosion without losing control? The courtroom scene forced him to answer those questions in real time. Here is a curiosity worth considering. Would Cruise have become the cinematic force he is today without that period of his career, when performance, not spectacle, was the proving ground? Or did the later stunt-driven chapters require the earlier dramatic chapters to give them legitimacy? Film history suggests the latter. Action without intent becomes noise. Action with intent becomes character. As Reiner's death circulated through the entertainment world, another effect emerged. Critics and viewers began reassessing what kind of filmmaker he truly was. It became clear that Reiner belonged to a rare category: directors who could move across genres without losing coherence. The industry often rewards specialization. Directors become branded: horror, action, comedy, prestige drama. But Reiner resisted that. He built a career out of films that had nothing in common on their surfaces, yet shared a commitment to character, timing, and emotional clarity. That range confused people who tried to categorize him while he was alive. Only when his filmography was viewed as a whole did the pattern become unmistakable. This pattern explained why A Few Good Men carried the weight that it did. Courtroom dramas can suffocate under procedural stiffness.
Colonel, we have the transfer order. You and Colonel Markinson co-signed ordering that Santiago will be on a flight leaving Guantanamo.
Audiences can lose patience with legal jargon. But Reiner understood that trials are inherently dramatic if the interpersonal stakes are high. Trials are confrontations disguised as procedure. They are battles disguised as etiquette. Officers do not raise their voices, they sharpen their questions. And when an actor like Jack Nicholson is given such a structure to operate within, tension becomes inevitable. The phenomenon on set, the rafters filling with crew, revealed something essential about acting that often gets lost in modern filmmaking. Acting is not only what we see on camera, it is an exchange of energy. It is a dialogue. It is a negotiation between control and surrender. When Nicholson delivered his monologue repeatedly, even when the camera was not pointed at him, he was not merely performing. He was feeding the environment. He was giving crews something to push against. He was building gravity in the room. Gravity is invisible in the final cut, but audiences can feel it. Reiner recognized the importance of that gravity. He did not rush to move on once he had coverage. He allowed the room to saturate. Many directors would have cut sooner, concerned about budget, schedule, or exhaustion. But Reiner knew that the intensity Nicholson created could not be summoned instantly. It required ignition, then sustain. And because he allowed that process, Cruise had something rare: an authentic opponent. Acting against a green screen requires imagination. Acting against Nicholson requires survival. This dynamic reveals something about Cruise's temperament that is often overlooked. People focus on his ambition, his physical daring, his relentless pursuit of control. But those qualities can obscure the fact that he is deeply responsive to the energy of other actors. He listens, he absorbs, he adjusts. His performance in A Few Good Men works not because he dominates Nicholson, but because he endures him. That endurance becomes the character's arc. It becomes the film's tension. It becomes the audience's investment. Without that dynamic, the final confrontation would collapse into parody. With it, the moment becomes a clarification of values: truth, chain of command, responsibility, and moral uncertainty. While the rumor of an intervention sought to impose a narrative of crisis, the truth revealed a narrative of calibration. Cruise did not require correction, he required collision. Reiner provided the environment. Nicholson provided the force. Cruise provided the change. That trilogy of function, environment, force, change is the architecture of transformation in cinema. Audiences often mistake transformation for breakdown, but transformation does not require personal crisis. It requires creative pressure. Pressure also emerged in how Reiner designed his films beyond acting. He understood rhythm. The Princess Bride feels effortless because the dialogue dances.
On the high seas, your ship attacked, and the dread pirate Roberts never takes prisoners.
When Harry Met Sally feels observational because the humor is timed like anthropology.
That is just like you, Harry. You say things like that, and you make it impossible for me to hate you.
Misery feels claustrophobic because the silences tighten around the audience like constricting loops.
But I didn't cheer. I stood right up and started shouting, "This isn't what happened last week!"
In each case, the emotion is engineered with precision and restraint. And restraint is where directors often fail. Restraint requires discipline. It requires knowing when not to escalate. It requires knowing when to let a moment breathe without decoration. This discipline became more visible after Reiner's death because it contrasted sharply with the state of contemporary filmmaking. Modern cinema often chases escalation without modulation. Everything must be louder, faster, and more relentless than what came before. Under those conditions, subtlety becomes almost radical. A Few Good Men now reads like a reminder that tension does not require spectacle. It requires structure. Cruise's later comments made this point indirectly. When he spoke about Nicholson's generosity and Reiner's leadership, he was describing conditions that are increasingly rare in large-scale filmmaking. He noted that Nicholson kept delivering the same energy take after take, that the rafters filled with observers, that the set became a sort of temporary theater. None of these details fit easily into a scandal narrative, but they fit perfectly into a craft narrative. Craft narratives are slower to circulate because they demand engagement rather than speculation. They do not hand the viewer a conclusion. They ask the viewer to consider a process. They require patience. They require curiosity. They require, in a sense, the same qualities that acting requires. Meanwhile, audiences watching Nicholson's monologue online in 2025 encountered it out of its historical context. Many viewers under 30 had never seen the film in full. They experienced the scene as a self-contained piece of cinema. And in isolation, Nicholson's performance reads like an explosion. But in context, it reads like a release. That distinction matters because the power of release depends on the tension that precedes it. In other words, the scene works because the film holds back until that moment. This delayed gratification is another form of intervention, not into a person, but into an audience's expectations. Reiner made them wait. He allowed frustration to accumulate. He allowed procedural detail to pile up. He allowed Caffey's uncertainty to simmer. Then he broke it open. Once audiences rediscovered this design, the rumor began to appear increasingly flimsy. It could not compete with the richness of the actual process. But for a time, the rumor persisted because it fulfilled a desire the truth did not. It allowed audiences to imagine that Cruise, despite his image of control, needed saving. It allowed audiences to imagine that Reiner, despite his gentle reputation, needed to rescue someone. It made the story resemble a trope. Tropes reduce complexity. They make life legible. But reality rarely obeys tropes. There was, however, an unexpected twist in how the rumor collapsed. When Cruise finally spoke at length about Reiner, he did not simply dismiss the gossip. He reframed the collaboration in terms of gratitude. He did not talk about being saved. He talked about being shaped. He talked as though Reiner had provided him with an artistic inheritance. That inheritance was not a technique or a mantra or a philosophy. It was a standard. It was a standard of seriousness, a standard of intention, a standard of respect for the audience. This standard illuminates the trajectory of Cruise's later career. His insistence on practical stunts is not merely a spectacle stunt. It is an argument. It is a conviction that cinema should demand something from the performer. That conviction did not emerge in isolation. It emerged from a lifetime of working in environments where the work was taken seriously. Reiner's set was one such environment. So, if there was an intervention, it was this. Reiner intervened in the belief that cinema should be effortless. He demonstrated that cinema requires effort. He demonstrated that performance requires risk. He demonstrated that the audience can feel when a film is made with care and when it is made with shortcuts. After Reiner's death, tributes highlighted his kindness. But kindness in creative environments is often misinterpreted as softness. Reiner's kindness was not softness. It was structure. It was leadership. It was the kind of leadership that does not need to humiliate in order to motivate. It was the kind of leadership that allows actors to be brave without being afraid. That is the most rare form of leadership in the arts because it does not create dependency. It creates strength. Rob Reiner did not save Tom Cruise from himself. He saved him from ease. And ease is the true enemy of longevity. As the rumor finally dissolved, another truth remained standing. Rob Reiner's legacy never needed scandal to make it compelling. It was compelling because his films endured. They were not built for shock value or trend cycles, but for connection. He understood that films survive when audiences carry them into their own lives. When they quote them at dinner tables, reference them with friends, or revisit them decades later because the story still speaks. That kind of durability cannot be manufactured through cynicism. It comes from sincerity and clarity. Tom Cruise, nearing his mid-60s, embodied a different version of durability. He insisted on effort. He insisted on seriousness. He insisted on giving the audience something real. For Cruise, authenticity often took the form of physical danger. Motorcycles off cliffs, free falls from helicopters, long takes on the sides of aircraft. For Reiner, authenticity took the form of performance, dialogue, rhythm, restraint, and timing. But both men believed the audience could feel the difference between something done easily and something done with intention. That belief made the rumor of an intervention almost ironic. The rumor suggested personal fragility, but the truth revealed artistic rigor. The rumor imagined a breakdown, but the truth described a collaboration. And collaborations are rarely sensational, but they are the reason films last. Cruise was not rescued. He was challenged. Nicholson did not overwhelm him. He pressured him. Reiner did not console him. He directed him. The transformation that audiences witnessed on screen came from that tension, not from crisis, but from craft. After Reiner's death, colleagues did not remember him for outbursts, conflicts, or tyrannical control. They remembered lunches, conversations, and laughter. They remembered a director who believed sets should feel human. That approach does not fit the modern expectation that creative excellence requires chaos. But Reiner proved the opposite. Stability can produce daring work. Kindness can produce precision. Respect can produce risk. His films are the proof. When Cruise finally reflected on Reiner at 63, he did not reveal a hidden scandal. He revealed that Reiner intervened in the work, not in his life. He intervened in the belief that cinema could be effortless. He intervened in the assumption that dialogue lacks impact. He intervened in the tendency to rush. He intervened in service of story, of performance, and of the audience. If audiences insist on calling that an intervention, then it was a cinematic one, and it succeeded. It gave Cruise one of his most enduring dramatic performances. It gave Nicholson one of his final great detonations of theatrical power. It gave Bacon and Moore a set they would later describe with affection instead of trauma. And it gave the audience a film that could be rediscovered 33 years later without losing its voltage. When Tom Cruise finally told the truth was quiet and clear. The best interventions in Hollywood are not about saving people. They are about saving the work. And Rob Reiner never stopped doing that.